morning, my friends. It is time to rise and shine. My name is Haylee Jacob, and welcome to my podcast, Rise and Shine. So, today's episode is kind of just really a breakdown of a story in the Bible, but kind of breaking down the themes of it. And it's going to be the book of Esther, because if you have not read this book, it is so good. And guys, if you haven't read like the Old Testament in general, it's got some really cool stories in it. And it's like true stories that would be awesome movies if you're like an action person, or love stories. Like, guys, that's all in the Bible. Go look up the Old Testament stories, and they are so good and they're so rich and full of some really, really cool things. So, what kind of brought this about with Esther, and why it's been on my heart lately, why this story's been on my heart, is last weekend my church went on a church retreat to Branson, and it was a really lovely time. We went and we kind of stayed a little bit outside of Branson on this really pretty property. It was beautiful, and we had prayer time, and it was just fantastic to really relax and fellowship with each other and be able to just hang out and not have any stress of like, we have to do this and we have to do that. And we get to kind of be in this beautiful area and appreciate God's creation. It was super cool. And I am hoping that this can be an annual thing with my church, because it was honestly really refreshing, and it kind of reignited a fire in me. And so it was really, really cool. But for one of the nights, we went to go see Sight and Sound Theater's production of Queen Esther. And I have a lot of good things to say about this. I had never seen a Sight and Sound production. I've seen one on DVD. I watched it like at home on DVD, and it was really good, but I had never seen one in person. And so I was just excited to see what they had to offer. I'm a music teacher. I'm a theater. My master's is in theater, so I'm a theater person. So I love the theater, and I've been to many shows. I've been to Broadway shows, and so high quality shows. So I wanted to see, what this was like. And the quality, guys, I'm not here to give a a critique or a review on it, although I would love to. Maybe I'll do that on a YouTube video or something. But the quality was amazing. It was just as good, if not better, than some of the Broadway shows that I've been to in New York on Broadway. High quality set, high quality acting and singing. The vocals were beautiful. The effects, the costume design, guys, it was so beautiful. I love Old Testament stories, so it was gorgeous to see this on the stage. And it was really cool because their stage is kind of like a three-sided stage almost. It's really cool. Anyway, so we went and saw Queen Esther, and I loved that Sight and Sound Theater did not focus on the performers. They did not focus on how good they were, even though it was amazing. They barely left time after a song for applause. They didn't do any showstopper type songs. All the songs were pointing toward God or told the story. They did not have a cast list with their names, and they did not do a curtain call. Instead of a curtain call, they did an altar call, a literal altar call. So Sight and Sound Theater did an amazing job at giving high quality theater performance and doing it literally all for the glory of God. I couldn't tell you what those actors' names were because I could not find them anywhere. I could not find them. Great job, Sight and Sound Theater. If you haven't been to a show, go to a show. And if you can't, they're on DVD. You can catch them on their website. You can like rent them and stream them. It's awesome. Anyway, so the story did take a few artistic liberties, which, when you take something, especially from the Bible, where things seem to move really quickly, but in reality, it took, years for this story to play out. You have to take some artistic liberties, but none of those were way off base. None of those detracted from the true story in the Bible. And there's some really awesome themes that I want to talk about and break down and really use them to encourage you in your story. So, if you've never read the book of Esther or don't know the story of Esther, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the story because for what I'm going to be talking about today, it's important to kind of understand the story and the events that took place. So, Esther, her Jewish name was Hadassah. Hadassah was a young girl who lived in Persia and lived with her uncle Mordecai because her parents had passed away when she was young, and her uncle Mordecai took her in and raised her. And during this time, the king had a very beautiful wife named Vashti. And he was having a party and he basically wanted to show off her beauty. And he had called for her to come up to the party and she refused. And because she refused, he basically divorced her, kind of cast her out. She was no longer queen. And to replace her as queen, they did this beauty contest where they took the most beautiful women in the land and prepared them for a year. They went through like 6 months of like oil treatments and 6 months of like training and stuff. So Esther was one of these women, and when she was chosen, Mordecai told her, do not reveal your nationality or your religion. Don't tell them that you're Jewish. And so she kept this secret the whole time. And so eventually she goes through all these treatments. She's favored by the eunuch that was in charge, Haggai, and she gets kind of special treatment, and eventually the king chooses her to be queen. So she becomes queen, and then a couple years later, Mordecai, her uncle, was sitting at the gate of the palace, and he overhears a plot by the king's guards to assassinate him. And so he tells Esther, and Esther tells one of the king's advisors, Haman. And so Mordecai, by telling Esther, was able to stop the assassination of the king, and Haman helped in that assassination. Well, so the king was super grateful, and then he promoted Haman, actually, and forgot Mordecai. Years later, Haman is promoted, and people are basically like they're bowing to him, and Mordecai will not bow to him. And this angers Haman. And so Haman comes up with this plan that he wants to kind of get rid of all the Jews. Haman is an Agagite, and we'll talk about why that's important. So Haman comes up with this plan that he's going to approach the king and tell the king, hey, there's a whole group of people who are not listening to your laws, who live in your area but don't serve you, don't worship you, don't see you as king, and live by their own rules, basically. And he says like they can overthrow you. And so of course that kind of freaks the king out. So the king tells Haman, okay, take my signet ring and you do what you think you need to do. Create this law and do what you need to do to stop these people. So Haman creates this law that on a specific day, the people of Persia can attack the Jews. And he signs it with this signet ring. And once it's been signed with that ring, it can't be reversed. It gets out that this day and this time, the Jews are going to be attacked. And so Mordecai goes to Esther and he says, you need to stop this. You need to approach the king and stop this. And Esther's kind of afraid because the law was you cannot approach the king. And if you do approach the king and he holds out his scepter to you, then you can approach him. But if you go into his throne room and he does not hold out his scepter to you, then you will die. the king started having these nightmares, and he was kind of tormented in his nightmares, and what calmed him down was reading of his historical records, the chronicles over his reign. And the king one night had this dream, and he called in his servant to read the records. And it just so happened that the servant picked the record of Mordecai saving the king, that Mordecai found it out. And the king remembered, oh, yeah, Mordecai, I never did anything for him. And so he asks Haman, what would you do for somebody who saved the king, who the king highly favors? And Haman comes up with these wonderful, exaggerated gifts and things that the king should do for him because Haman thinks that it's him. And then Mordecai gets all of those great things that Haman wanted for himself. And so that's what actually initially angered Haman, is that Mordecai got all of these things, was kind of praised, and Mordecai wouldn't bow to him. And Mordecai got everything that he wanted for himself. So Esther fasted and prayed for 3 days because she said, if I go to the king, I need to be ready. And she had her servants fast and pray. And she approaches the king, and she has this plan because the king has, or Haman, sorry, has this plan for Mordecai that he wants to shame Mordecai and basically execute him. And he has the gallows already set up for him. And finally, Esther has this banquet. She ends up having two banquets, and she reveals to the king and to Haman that Haman plans on attacking her people. And so the king, super upset that he was tricked by Haman, ends up executing Haman and all of his family on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And that's basically the story of Queen Esther. That was a brief and very not detailed story. So go in and read it for yourself because it's so, so good. Okay, some of the themes in this story, these themes have always, of course, been in this story, but seeing it on stage and hearing it in music, I'm a musical person, really helped bring it to life for me. The first theme I want to talk about is being still and waiting, and having the wisdom and patience while waiting. Hadassah, when she was chosen to be in this contest, went by her Persian name, Esther, and kept her true religion and nationality a secret. She was waiting. She didn't want to reveal herself that moment, because if she had revealed herself in that moment, it's very likely that she wouldn't have been queen. It's very likely that she wouldn't have even been accepted into this contest because she was a Jew. She had to wait and be still. And there were her like musical motif in the play was constantly a be still, and it was her singing that throughout the play, and it really just grips you. Like, she's going through all this, and she's being like thrust into this world that she doesn't know, and she's having to go through all these things and learn all these new things and impress the king. And she knows that all she can do is be still and know, and all she can do is trust that God has a plan for her, and having the wisdom to be patient about revealing who she really is. Because it could have been easy, if she didn't want to, could have been easy for her to be like, sorry, I can't, I'm Jewish, so you probably don't want me. I'm going to back out now. But she had the wisdom and the patience to know and to really trust in God and be still and let Him work His plan out. So sometimes we have to be careful about when God speaks something to us. Maybe He's revealed something to us, or has given us a seed to grow. Sometimes we have to be careful with when we talk about it and when we reveal it to other people, and even when we act upon it. Because if you rush into it, or if you move into it too soon, then it's not God's perfect timing, and you can mess things up for a little bit. God can definitely take everything and turn it for His good, but it may not have been His perfect will. So sometimes when God gives you something and reveals something to you, you need to pray for the wisdom to know when to reveal that to others and when to act upon it, and pray for the patience to wait on his timing. I understand when you're excited about something, when you're on fire for something, when you're like, yes, God has placed this in me and I'm so excited for him to use me. It's hard when he says, okay, but not yet. Ooh, that's so hard to wait because you get excited and you want to keep that excitement. But you have to pray for that patience and that wisdom to be still and wait on him to move you into it. When Esther had been chosen and it was revealed that Haman had this plan to kill all the Jews, and Mordecai begged Esther to go before the king and plead for their lives and plead for her people, she didn't rush into it. At first, she even kind of was scared. She kind of didn't really want to at first. But when she finally did say yes, she fasted and prayed for 3 whole days. And she had her servants fast and pray. And she told Mordecai, her uncle, to tell everybody he knew to fast and pray. So she didn't rush into it. She was patient. She had the wisdom to know, okay, I cannot just blindly walk into this or I'm going to die and everybody I love is going to die. So she didn't just blindly walk into it. She prayed and fasted for God to give her the timing and give her the words to say on how to approach the king. She prepared herself for what God was going to do. And I've talked about fasting on the podcast before. Fasting doesn't make God hear you. Fasting prepares you for what God has to say to you. And that's what she was doing. She was preparing herself. She understood the dangers of her task and she trusted that God had a plan. She was still and knew that God had a plan, even if that plan was that she didn't make it. She said, if I perish, I perish in chapter 4. She understood, okay, God's asking me to do this, and I've fasted and I've prayed and I've waited and I've was patient, and God's telling me to go now, and I'm going to trust in him. And I think Esther is a great example of trusting in the Lord because of all she went through. One, the reason she was with Mordecai, her uncle, is because her parents had passed away when she was a little girl and her uncle took her in. And still, she had great faith in the Lord. And then she gets thrown into this contest, ripped away from her uncle for a whole year. And so finally, God said, okay, it's time to reveal your truth. God put you here for this reason so that she can go before the king and stop this attack on her people. In chapter 4, before she finally agrees to do that, to do what Mordecai asked of her, she is kind of scared. And Mordecai answers her and says, don't think, this is chapter 4, verse 12, and it says, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And we focus on for such a time as this. That's what a lot of people focus on because yes, God appoints certain times for us to do his will, for us to do what we're created to do. But I want to bring us back to Mordecai's admonition of don't think that just because you're in the king's palace, don't think you're safe from that. And don't think that God won't raise up somebody else. He says, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. Mordecai is telling her, Yes, God has chosen you and equipped you and placed you for this reason, but humans still have free will. We still make choices, and we still decide whether or not we're going to follow God's will or follow our own free will. And so Esther very well could have not said anything. She very well could have just pretended like she wasn't a Jew, pretended like she knew nothing of that world, that it didn't bother her that all these people were going to be attacked. She could have pretended and remained silent, and God would have delivered his people still, because God's going to deliver his people. But it wouldn't have been as perfect of a will as what he had planned. He would have risen someone else up. But as Mordecai says, people still would have perished. Her family, her line would have like ended there. And it wouldn't have been as good. It wouldn't have been what God's first choice would have been. We need to be reminded of that. God does have a perfect will, and then there's a good will. God God's perfect will is what he has planned for us, and if we walk in his ways always. But he knows that we're human, and he knows that we're going to fall short, and he knows that we have free will and can choose not to take the path that he's laid out for us. He's a good God. And so his plans and his will are not based on human actions. So if he's wanting to deliver the Jewish people from Haman, he's going to do it. No matter what Esther's choice would have been, he's going to do it. It may not have been perfect, it may not have been as effective as if Esther would have done it, but he would have risen somebody else up. And that person wouldn't have been the queen. That person wouldn't have the ear of the king. That person wouldn't have been as fully equipped as Esther was. But God still would have gotten the job done, because he's God and he's going to use whoever is willing to follow him. I think that is kind of my main point of the day, really. God's people have specific callings on our lives. But if your free will goes against his perfect calling, he'll find someone else. Though you may be better suited, he'll find someone else. Don't let the Lord pass you by. Don't sit idly and let someone else do what God has called you to do. Because if he's called you to do it, then he's fully equipped you to do it. And you can do the best job. You can do what he's wanting you to do. Other people can do it, but he wanted you to do it. And if God gives you something to do, if the creator of the universe has given you a job and a purpose, why wouldn't you want to fulfill that? So let's talk a little bit about Haman and the fact that he's an Agagite. And this is something that I actually didn't make a connection until I saw the play. The play kind of made the connection for me, and it made more sense in the way that they explained it. Thinking back all the way to 1 Samuel, when Saul became king, towards the beginning of Saul's story, God had told Saul to attack the Amalekites. And he gave Saul the instruction of destroy everything. Don't leave anything alive. Don't take any prisoners. It was a destroy everything command. And instead, Saul kept the Amalekite, I think it was the king, I'm not sure what the title was, but Saul kept the Amalekite leader, and his name was Agag. He was supposed to destroy everything, but he kept Agag for whatever reason, because Saul didn't listen. And eventually, Agag had descendants, and Haman was one of these descendants. That's why he's called an Agagite, because he is a son of Agag. And these people are enemies of the Jews. That's how the Bible describes them, the enemies of the Jews. And they're wanting the destruction of the Jews. And so Haman, because Saul destroyed all the Amalekites back then and only kept Agag, and they only had one line left of the Amalekites. Haman wanted this destruction of Jews. So that's why he went to the king and said, hey, and he was super sneaky. He was like, hey, there's a group of people who don't follow your laws, who don't worship you first, who create their own laws and they do whatever they want. And he's talking about the Jews, but he never says who it is. And of course, the king's like, well, oh my goodness, like if there's people out there who are wanting to overthrow me, then yeah, we need to stop this. We need to put a stop to this. And without even asking, the king allows Haman to create this edict that on this day of this month, Persians can attack this group of people. And, the story goes on, and we talked about it earlier. Esther goes before the king, risking her own life, and he accepts her. So he reaches out his scepter toward her, which means that, yes, you can approach me. And she reveals, in God's timing, that she is a Jew and that the king has allowed Haman to kill her, basically, to attack her people. The king creates this new, so again, like I said, once a law or once something has been imprinted by the signet ring of the king, it can't be reversed. So the king has to create this new law, this new edict that the Jews can defend themselves and must do everything they can to defend themselves. And then the guys, this story is so full because I'm glossing over so much, but eventually Haman's whole family is executed because Haman had planned the execution for Mordecai, but it was flipped around and Haman's whole family was executed, which in my opinion is kind of an ironic end, starting all the way back with Saul. God's command to Saul was finally fulfilled with Haman's execution. And how I see it, that's just my opinion, because Saul did not kill Agag, but finally Haman, the Agagite, and his whole family were executed. And it's kind of thinking about God called Saul to do it, and Saul didn't do it because of his free will. And years, generations later, finally, God's command was fulfilled. So going back to, don't think that you'll escape this if you remain silent, because God's going to do what he said he's going to do. He wants to use you, but if you don't do it, he'll use someone else. And same thing with Saul. Saul didn't do it. He used Esther and Mordecai to do it generations later. So yeah, it wasn't the most perfect outcome, because the perfect outcome would have been that Agag wouldn't have even lived through that attack. Therefore, Haman wouldn't have existed. But that's not how it happened. And God still used his people to fulfill his word. Last thing I kind of want to talk about is God's orchestration in everything in this whole book. And again, I didn't tell the entire story. I very briefly glossed over it. So go back and read this book because it's amazing. This is one of 2 books in the entire Bible that actually doesn't mention God by name. It's Esther and Song of Solomon is the other one. These 2 books don't mention God by name, but God is in this story so deeply. And I want to take a look at kind of how you can see God in this story, even though his name is not mentioned. First, when Queen Vashti just decided that day, I'm not going to go into this party. I'm not doing what my husband just asks of me at will, willy-nilly. That was God's orchestration. He had to remove Vashti first, because if he hadn't have removed Vashti, then there would have been no need for Esther. And then when God brought Esther into the king's court, he placed her with Haggai and gave her favor with Haggai. Haggai liked her more than all the other girls. And so Haggai gave her special treatment, which helped her have a better impression on the king. She even asked Haggai, so the night they went to meet the king, they got to bring one thing with them in to meet the king. And she, instead of picking on her own, picking the most fantastic necklace or crown or whatever, she asked Haggai, "What do you think I should bring?" And that's God's orchestration too. God placed Mordecai at the gate when he overheard a plan by two of the king's guards to assassinate the king. He overheard this because he was in the right place at the right time. God placed him there to overhear this plan. And because Mordecai overheard it, he got word to Esther and they stopped it. So, placing Mordecai at the gate that night. And then placing Esther, a Jew, as queen when Haman walks in and says, "Let's get rid of all these people." Oh, guess what? Your queen is one of these people. So that's not going to happen. The king had a dream. God gave him the dream, and God orchestrated which chronicle would be read that night. God's got everything. And all we have to do is be still and know that He is God and wait patiently for Him, for us to be used by Him for what such a time as this. This story is very reflective of what's going on today. Israel is being attacked today, still. After generations and thousands of years, they're being attacked just like they were in Esther's time. And I do think that God has a plan because He's going to save His people. And we as Christians have been grafted into His family, into His people. And He wants to use us for such a time as this. And it may not be that we are promoted to being queens or kings, but He has given us all something. And He wants to use us all. And we have to be patient and we have to be ready and willing, just like Esther readied herself. And we have to listen, or He will use someone else. So, what is God calling you into? What talents or gifts has He given you? Where has He placed you? What audience has He given you for such a time as this? And if you don't do it, who is going to? And that is our conversation on habits and healing with Kristen Campbell. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and share with your friends. We have more guests coming up for you soon. And so if you liked this guest episode, if you liked the structure of this, then you're in luck. We've got more coming out super soon, and it's going to be so good. All right, guys, I hope that you have a wonderful week and don't forget to let your light shine.